No, seriously, let's keep clapping. Here we go. All right.
Thanks. I recently got some great news. Apparently my IQ is increasing and I'm getting smarter. And this happened as a function of my oldest daughter turning 28. And around the time that she turned 13, I'd noticed that my IQ had dropped off remarkably. I'd become an incredibly lame idiot, and this has kind of played out with the other kids as well. But suddenly, when she got into her mid-20s, suddenly the phone would ring and she would call and say, "Hey, Dad, I could use some advice." And it was a remarkable transition. It really kind of made me feel good that I somehow or other made this leap from becoming this complete moron to somebody that once again had a clue. And it caused me to reflect on my own childhood, because I'd suffered from the same thing. I think about the time that I was 13 or 14 years old. My parents suddenly became these people that I couldn't be seen with. And the small town that I grew up in upstate New York is very tiny, very homogenous, and then to boot, my dad was a Presbyterian minister. And so we had a small congregation, a lot of elderly people in the congregation, and it wasn't necessarily something that 13 or 14 I necessarily wanted to be associated with. And so as I got deeper into my teenage years, I continued to perfect my rebellion, and I went at it in every possible way I could to try to establish as much distance as I could from this small town thing, and then being the preacher's kid, which was always felt to me like such a burden. And when I think 1977, 1978, I was around 17 years old, and we'd made this trek to my grandparents' house out in Illinois every year. And this particular year, I'd concocted this great plan that friends of mine, parental supervision, we're going to take a group of us to this lake in the Poconos, and we were going to go water skiing. So it was imperative that I left the family vacation and drive back to New York to go do this thing with my friends and their parents. But I lied a little bit about it. I embellished the start date on when exactly this water ski trip to the Poconos was going to take place. So I buffered it by a couple of days, and that meant that I was going to come back home and I was going to have a keg party at the house. And I invited like in this little town, I think our entire high school class may have been 180 or so students. I think every one of them came, and they brought their friends. And we had a couple of kegs, and we had the old consolidated stereo in the backyard with the speakers hooked up. And it was a great party, and people were passing out in the bushes before the end of the night. And at some point along the way, the police showed up on 2 different occasions, which back in that day, really wasn't such a horrible thing. They'd say, the neighbors have complained about the noise. Could you turn it down? And then they came back again at about 1 o'clock in the morning. And the party was a terrific success, and I was feeling like I'd really kind of pulled one over on the parents, and I was going to be able to get away with this. Well, the next morning, I'm outside picking up, and this is pre-Red Solo Cup, but I'm going around picking up all of the trash in the yard and the cups, and picking up making sure that the kegs and all the other evidence was disappearing. And as I'm out in the front yard of the house, I observe a slow-moving progression of cars approaching the house. And the cars, the first thing I noticed about the cars is that they were really, really old school. Ramblers, Zephyrs, lots and lots of chrome, 10 miles to the gallon on a great day on the highway. And behind the wheel of every car, there was somebody that's head barely came above the steering wheel, and blue hair, and little glasses that were probably inspired by Elton John. And as I looked, it was, and the folks, the little old women that went to my dad's church had names like Ethel and Gertrude and Zelda, and things that we don't name our kids anymore. But sure enough, it's a progression of Ethels and Zeldas and Gertrudes, and it turns out that Gertrude Dwyer has got a police scanner. And the pre-social networking, the word had gone out through the elders and deacons at the church that the police had been called twice to Reverend Mills' house during the night. And so about 8 of these little old ladies, all deacons in the church, had to do the slow drive-by, and here I am in the front yard with my cups and the keg by the side of the car. And yeah, I was immediately, there was part of me that was proud of my rebellion, but also knew immediately that I was completely busted, and that I was going to have to come clean with my dad, which I proceeded to do. And I've always carried that story with me, and carried it into parenthood. And I share it with you today with the wishes that you all get your own rebellion and you all get your own wisdom. Thanks.
Aaron, everybody.